Elongated pipe nose man. Melting clocks. 200-foot tall insect-legged elephants. 10,000 fingered flautists. Alien landscapes. Genital-shaped biomechanical parasitic monstrosities. Painting your own face onto a deer getting murdered. Stroking your uncle to sleep, who has the body of a slice of cheese, whilst a guy plays a guitar in the background and the sky is made of cubes and another guy watches with a glass of wine and a multi-spoon drawer and more melting clocks and what the heck is going on with this outfit? Why is there a glass on the umbrella? Why is umbrella when no rain? A guy with only half a torso, with boat-like hands, made of trees, with his heart on his head, with people around, and people climbing inside his torso with a ladder to form some kind of inner torso community. All of these have one thing in common. They are all works of the same artistic movement. A style that happens to be my favorite and is considered by many to be haunting, strange, and terrifying. Since it's Halloween season, the season of spookiness, I thought I'd talk about it, and we can delve together into the twisted depths of its complexities. This is the artistic movement of... Hello and welcome. I am Second Voltage, and today I thought I'd do something different. We're going to talk about my favorite genre of art and the cultural movement it embodies, Surrealism. I've also recently made another of my own surrealist works. This time I was inspired by the works of Hieronymous Bosch, great name, who I only recently discovered. You can see me working my way through that throughout this video. But without further ado, let's get into the meat of this video by addressing a very important question. Just what in the living name of all heck is Surrealism? The Surrealist movement began in earnest in the 1920s, but to truly understand how this artistic movement began, we must first familiarize ourselves with the landscape of the era preceding it. World War I, the Great War. At the time, it was the biggest conflict the world had ever seen, including nations from all around the world. Most of Europe, the Russian Empire, the United States, and the Ottoman Empire. All of the world's greatest superpowers were in conflict with one another, and it created an era of terror, misery, and horrors the likes of which had never even been comprehended before. New technologies such as the aeroplane, the beginning of trench warfare, and chemical weaponry wrought unprecedented devastation on the peoples of the world. An estimated 9 million soldiers perished in combat, and roughly another 5 million civilian casualties occurred as a result of the war. Millions more died in Ottoman genocides and the 1918 influenza pandemic. For roughly 4 years, the planet was transformed into the physical embodiment of hell, and the repercussions would echo on throughout history. The war ended, and there was a brief interim of wary peace, but it was not long-lived as a second conflict, even bigger than the first, arose, World War II. Nations sought to one-up themselves on the horrors committed in the First World War, and every nation involved on every side created new technologies of death and sought to cause horror and destruction on a scale never before seen in the history of our planet. It was a hell even worse than hell. This is the landscape just before and during the inception of the Surrealist movement. Even after the conflicts truly ended, the world was still shaken by the devastating events of the early 20th century. It would take a long time for people to recover from the horrors that were thrust upon them, and some of the fallout of those wars still lasts until this day. Not everything after the war would be bad. In fact, the arms race from both conflicts would usher in a new wave of technological growth that would catapult the human race light years ahead of anything we have achieved before. We can now claim to be an interplanetary species with the entire collective information of all mankind being accessible from within our pockets. But there was far more bad than good that happened as a result of those wars. And the point here is the influence that that level of misery had upon the peoples of that time. As I know from personal experience, going through extreme traumatic events can really mess you up. And people, as always, sought to express their feelings through various media. And in many cases, especially in the media of art, these feelings manifested themselves as surrealism. The Surrealist movement proper was started by André Breton from France in 1924 with his Surrealist manifesto. He succeeded in claiming the term of a rival faction led by Yvan, who had published their own manifesto. The term Surrealism was coined in 1917 by Guillaume Apollinaire, but it wasn't until Breton until the movement actually got underway. Breton was trained in medicine and psychiatry, and during the war he worked in a neurological hospital treating soldiers suffering from shell shock. After the war, he returned to Paris and joined various activist groups as well as starting a literary journal with some of his contemporaries. By 1924, the two rival surrealist groups had published their manifestos. Breton had come to the conclusion that numerous societal problems had created a situation where society was restricting people's liberties and, more importantly, the limit of their thoughts and ideologies. They sought to liberate people's imagination, cause a shift in society, freeing people from false rationality and restrictive customs and structures. Breton and Gaulle clashed with each other with their dual manifestos, literally fighting at one point, but Breton won out in the end for the rights to the term surrealism. Though from then on, whilst most subscribed to Breton's general descriptions of the movement, most surrealists had their own views and goals, and the history of surrealism would become marked with fractures and resignations. And so the movement of surrealism was born. It would go on to penetrate the mediums of literature, film, theatre, photography, and music, but today we will be focusing on its influence on the world of art. Let's take a look at some of the artists that define this genre. I won't cover all of them, there are far too many. Instead, I'll simply focus on some of my absolute favorites. The ones that have inspired me the most. First, the inspiration for my most recent artwork, Hieronymous Bosch. Hieronymous Bosch lived between 1450 and 1516, which puts him well before the inception of surrealism. His work was mostly in fantasism. So what is he doing in this video, you might ask? Well, Bosch was a proto-surrealist. His work was way ahead of his time, and many early surrealists cited him as an inspiration. Whilst there was no concept of surrealism during the Renaissance period, his work certainly echoes the same feel as more modern surrealist works. Perhaps Bosch's most well-known work is The Garden of Earthly Delights, which is displayed in the Museo del Prado in Madrid. It depicts 3 separate panels. On the left is the Garden of Eden, the central panel represents the rest of Earth and humanity, and on the right is the Last Judgment. The piece contains vast amounts of nudity and weirdness. Some of the highlights include a unicorn cat, people crawling into a giant shrimp, a multi-limbed owl person, a nun pig making unwanted advances, whatever this is, the aforementioned boat-footed man, and the bird eating and then pooping people. It is a veritable smorgasbord of weirdness and imagination. And this kind of free thinking and creativity is what inspired many of the surrealist artists of the past, and obviously still some today, including myself. Next is perhaps the most famous surrealist artist of all, Salvador Dali, perhaps best known for creating the Chupa Chups logo. Graphic design aside, he is also famously known for his surrealist works. Some of his well-known surrealist works include pieces such as The Great Masturbator and Soft Construction with Beans. The most well-known being The Persistence of Memory. You've probably seen this one at least before. The one with all the melting clocks. If you want to see it in person, it's in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Dali's works were absolutely fantastic, and I think I probably get my eccentric naming of my weirder, more surrealist art from him. I think there's little doubt when you look at his works such as Young Virgin Auto-Sodomized by the Horns of Her Own Chastity. Truly a genius with words as well as paint. Now, the next two artists you will perhaps be familiar with if you've played the recently released game Scorn. The art style of that game is a surrealist's dream, by the way, if you've not seen it. Absolutely gorgeous. But the next two artists happen to have inspired the art style of that game in equal parts. And they happen to be my two favorites, which is probably rather stereotypical for someone of my generation, as I've been heavily influenced by pop culture, and I feel like these two are kind of the mainstream of modern surrealist art, so far as surrealism can ever have a mainstream. In any case, here's the first one. Zdzisław Beksiński. It's difficult even looking at his name. He was a Polish painter who specialized in dystopian surrealism. Beksiński did not title any of his works, but I will show you some of them now. In the large part, he painted landscapes. He is quoted saying, "I wish to paint in such a manner as if I were photographing dreams." He certainly achieves that. That is, if you dream of hell every night. His work evokes a sense of decay and fragility. The landscapes he depicts are about as alien as they come, truly chilling vistas of despair and agony. But Beksiński himself saw not despair in his works, but optimism and hope, even humor. He was adamant that they were misunderstood and refused to accept any interpretations of them, as he did not even know the meaning of his art himself. This is why he refused to name any of his works, in an endeavor to emphasize this viewpoint. And then there is not only my favorite surrealist artist, but my favorite artist of all time, h.r.giger. It would not be surprising if you've heard of him, as he is quite well known for his work on the film Alien. Giger primarily made oil paintings of nightmarish, surreal dreamscapes in a style known as biomechanical art, which combines elements of machinery with organics. Giger gained international fame for his work on Alien, designing the titular creature, the space jockey, and the derelict. He even won an Oscar for his work on the film. He is also well known for his work on various album covers, and his microphone design for Jonathan Davies of Scorn. For me, Giger's work symbolizes both the sensual and the terrifying, a combination of both pleasure and fear, encompassing all of the horror and dread of the human experience. Art doesn't have to make you feel good for it to be good art. It just has to make you feel something. And Giger's work evokes stronger emotions in me than any other, even if what I'm feeling is at times fear or even disgust. Giger suffered from sleep problems and night terrors, and often drew on his own dreams as inspiration for his art. In 1975, Giger was in a relationship with Swiss actress Lee Tobler, when she killed herself due to depression. After this, images of her frequently appeared in his work. He kept dream journals after being inspired by Freud, and it seems clear that his art was also a form of therapy. Perhaps this is why I identify with it so much myself. I have suffered from mental illness for most of my life, including depression and anxiety, and my art has often been a source of therapy to me. My more disturbing work often as a result of when I feel the worst. But getting my negative feelings out on paper, whether it be by words or images, always helps to dispel them. Sometimes to get rid of demons, you first have to look them in the eye. Perhaps this, then, is what I see in Giger's work, a kindred spirit in suffering. But he overcame his suffering and was able to become one of the most successful artists of the modern era. Hell, he even bought a castle, which you can visit, as it is now the site of the h.r.giger Museum in Gruyere, Switzerland, where you can see on display many of his works. There are far more surrealist artists of renown, such as feminist icon Frida Kahlo, known for painting many self-portraits of herself, and even Pablo Picasso's later works echo surrealism, but I digress. Here, by the way, is my own finished artwork. I stuck with the monochrome for this because I was inspired by Giger's mainly monochromatic color scheme, and definitely not because I was too lazy to add any color. As I said at the beginning, I was mostly inspired by the weird demons of Hieronymous Bosch, but there is a good amount of Giger influence in there as well. Though by standards of weirdness, this is one of my least weird. Didn't want to alienate anyone on YouTube with my completely unfiltered madness. You'll have to check out my DeviantArt if you want to see that. But there's no doubt that surrealism is one of the biggest influences for my weird work. In many ways, it is unnerving and horrifying, but in others, it can be liberating. Surrealism is an expression of the unconscious mind, of dreams, of nightmares. It is a celebration of imagination and freedom. Some of the art may seem illogical and senseless, but what it represents is the very core of the human experience. Because the fundamental difference between humans and other animals on this planet is our ability to imagine things that could exist beyond what we can see around us, and even things that couldn't possibly ever exist. It is what has allowed us to evolve and develop and become the dominant species of life on this planet, and surrealism is nothing less than a pure expression of the human subconscious, of imagination unbound. And that, I think, is rather beautiful. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like it, please like and subscribe.